Alright, here we go. Gonna go ahead and get started. I don't even. I can't even tell if it's.
Draw this. Yeah, I did. Did stay away. Yeah. No, it's every other day. Goes down there, goes up there.
We're going to start in a couple minutes. Before we get started, Eli's going to be videotaping like the first 40 minutes of class. I'm applying to be an instructor at Emergency Management Institute, National Fire Academy. So I've got to I got to send them a 30-minute video of me instructing. So just so you know, the first 40 minutes or so will be videotaped. Please ask questions just like you normally would. Help me like you normally would. I don't care about. Just know that I'll be videotaping that. First part of it. Apparently so is Tyson.
No, I'm doing it for my channel, so.
Did you ask permission to videotape it? Did you ask permission to use the FEMA ICS course information on your channel?
Can I?
No, you can't. Can't use FEMA stuff on your channel.
It's fine. Not gonna get. Oof. Yes, that's good.
I told him to ask you before we did anything.
Can't do it. Eli's taping me because I'm sending it to FEMA. You cannot take FEMA's instructional material. They know where to find you.
Like helicopters.
That's right.
Watching over your back.
They already do.
When you finish school, man?
2 classes.
8 weeks, man.
Center on training, Ross, we just initial. Name. If you don't know how to write your initials, just put X. Good luck. Find a home for it. going to do some kind of introduction to incident command system. So ICS, how many people have heard of ICS, incident command system before? Okay, so some of you see brand new information. What we're doing tonight is we're going to go through what's called ICS 100. That's an introduction to incident command system. So again, some of you, this will be brand new information. It's something that you need to know. If you have any questions, just let me know as we go. I'll be happy to answer your questions. Not something that we formally do a lot, right, when we respond to stuff, but something that we need to start thinking about using more often in a formal way. If we have a large incident, we have a complex incident or something like that, this really is a standard. We'll talk about the National Incident Management System and the standards associated with that. We'll talk in depth about ICS. Get through much of it as we can tonight, and then we'll do some more training on it later on in the year. But I at least want to introduce some of you that are not familiar with ICS. You can also go online to the FEMA website, and there are online classes that you can take. ICS 100, 200, and 700 are all online. You can do as an independent study. You can go on and take the test and pass the test, and you can get a certificate of completion. So that's something that we'll want you to do at some point, right? Tonight, again, is just meant to be an introduction for you into the ICS. Some of you will be a refresher. Even if you have gotten ICS 100, 200, or 700 within the last 10 years or so, they update the information about every 4 or 5 years. So the series now is ICS 100.c. So if you have A or B, you probably want to refresh yourselves. Tonight will be a good refresher, or you can go online, you can take the independent study. It doesn't take a real long time. You can take the test and get your certification. So you can either do that on your own, or we'll plan for everybody to do that at some point this year. So anybody have any questions before I get started? Okay. So again, this course will introduce you to the ICS system. Again, this is just an introduction. If it's something you're really interested in, beyond the ICS 100, 200, and 700, which are the basic, there's also ICS 300 and 400. Both of those are instructor-led courses. They're advanced incident management system, or advanced ICS, for responding to complex incidents. For both of those, ICS 300 is a 3-day course. ICS 400 is a 2-day course. I've talked with Mike Fincher, MA Director. We're talking about trying to do ICS 300 and 400 course this year in Carroll County. So that's something that we may look to do. Some of you that would meet the prerequisites for that. So that's something else to be looking forward to. Again, as it says up there, it's just a series of courses. ICS is the system that's used nationwide to respond to incidents regardless of size, right? So it doesn't have to be some big, complex, massive incident that you need to think about using ICS. We use ICS on every run that we go on, okay? Because first person on the scene from the fire department is the incident commander. That's one of the basic principles. The very first person, doesn't matter who it is, right? If you respond for the fire department, you're the first person on scene, you're the incident commander for the fire department. So keep that in mind, right? If you're responding to the scene and you're not coming to the station first, like you should, right? Unless you're close to the scene, you're the incident commander. So you are responsible for everything that goes along with being an incident commander when you respond on scene. So keep that in mind. All right, so really the goal tonight is just to familiarize you with incident command system and the NIMS principles to manage incidents. This is just an introduction. Again, for some of you, it's brand new information. As you have questions, let me know and we'll work through it. Prepare you to coordinate with response partners. This is both public sector and private sector. Okay, so it's public safety and private sector uses it well. So my daytime job at the utility company, we use the incident command system. Okay, we use ICS in our responses on the gas side, the electric side. We have incident management teams, so it's not just used in police, fire, emergency management. It's used in the private sector as well. ICS 100, again, it's part of the National Incident Management System, so you may have heard that term NIMS. That's what NIMS is the National Incident Management System. Skip through those objectives. I'm not going to have you introduce yourselves. So again, there's a final exam that we'll take later that you can do online. So at the end of this, we'll talk about what the whole community approach is to ICS. So that's a term that you'll hear a lot in FEMA trainings, any other trainings that you might go to that have anything to do with the National Incident Management System, is the idea of whole community, and I'll talk about what that is in a minute. And again, this is what we're going to do tonight, and then subsequent nights when we do ICS training, is to talk about the basic concept and the benefits of ICS. So again, that's really what we're doing. So whole community, if you've not heard that term before, again, anything you go through for ICS or exercises or anything like that, you'll hear whole community. When we're talking about whole community, it's all these things that you see here. It's everybody, right? It's law enforcement, it's healthcare, it's governments of all sizes, it's private industry, it's faith-based groups, it's non-governmental organizations or NGOs, so things like Red Cross, Salvation Army, those are non-governmental organizations. And those are organizations involved in preparing for, responding to, recovering from disasters or incidents. So when we say whole community, that's what we're talking about. All those people that have to work together to make sure that we can respond and have resources for responding, preparing, and recovering from incidents. Okay, so incident command system. What is incident command system? You can see the bullet points up there. I'm not going to read them word for word, but it's used by government, private sector to respond to all levels of incidents. Again, it doesn't have to be this huge incident that occurs. We use it every time that we respond. Again, that first person on the scene, no matter who it is, from law enforcement or the fire department, whoever gets there first, they're the incident commander until they transfer that command to somebody else. Okay? Can be used not only for emergencies, but also for planned events. So, incident command systems used for emergencies, but it's also used for planned events. So, like when we do large events, so Bacon Fest, we use incident command system in planning for that large event, which is Bacon Fest, right? When you see other big things that happen, so the Super Bowl, they used ICS for the Super Bowl. Large sporting events like that, the Indianapolis 500, the State Fair, all those things you're familiar with, they're using ICS as they plan those events. Enables a coordinated response among the various response agencies. So ICS is used because it's common terminology, so we use the same words to mean the same things, the same position titles, some ICS forms are the same, the structure of ICS is the same. That way, if we're responding to something in another part of the state and we're all using ICS, we all know what we're talking about. We all know that we're organized the same, we're using common terminology, so it doesn't lead to confusion. Same thing in the private sector. That's why in my company that I work for, that's why we use ICS, because we're a utility company. And if we're responding to an emergency, who's going to respond? Who responds to a gas leak? Fire department, right? Law enforcement. So if we're responding as the gas company to one of our emergencies, we know that our public safety partners are going to be there from the fire department, law enforcement, or whoever. We want to be speaking the same language, right? So that's why we use ICS in the utility company, and other private sector companies do that as well. Again, common processes for incident level and resource management, and allows the integration of resources within a common organizational structure like I talked about. And I'll show you what that structure is here in a little bit. So where did ICS start? Incident command system started really in the early 1970s. It was called Fire Scope, and it started in California with wildland firefighting. So if you think about the wildland fires that happen every year out west, they're large incidents that cover a lot of geography. They go over multiple jurisdictions, right? So they go through several different counties, different areas that different fire departments are going to be responding to. And CAL FIRE and others realized they needed a way to manage these large incidents. The complex incidents, think about all the resources that it takes to fight one of these large wildland fires. And so they started off with Fire Scope. And they saw how useful Fire Scope was, not just for the fire service, but that something could be used for all public safety agencies and private sector. So Fire Scope eventually became what we know as the Incident Command System. So that's where it started, and that's the history of ICS. Any questions so far? Okay. All right, when is ICS used? Again, you'll hear me say that several times. It doesn't matter the size or the scope or the complexity of the incident. It can be used on all incidents, and we should use it on all incidents. But it can be responding to either an emergency or a planned event. We need to be really careful though, and I've seen this happen in the private sector. People like the idea of ICS so much that they tend to want to use it for things other than an incident or a planned event. So like for project management, there's a lot of people in my company that really like ICS, right? And they tend to want to use it for project management type stuff. That's not the purpose of ICS. Purpose of ICS is for incident response and for pre-planned events. So we just need to make sure that we keep it in that framework. Use of ICS is applicable to all incidents regardless of their size or cause. Using ICS for every incident or planned event provides the practice that will help to maintain and improve skills needed to effectively coordinate larger or more complex efforts. So if we're not using ICS like we should on our smaller incidents, if we have a complex incident, it's going to be really hard for us to know how to use ICS, right? So that's why I'm doing this tonight, so that we start getting some familiarity with ICS. You start learning the terms, you start learning some of the structure of ICS, right? And then we can start implementing it into, our smaller incidents, right? We should be using ICS on our smaller incidents, especially when we have mutual aid, in hopes that some of this training we can do with other departments in the county as well, so that we at least have a basic fundamental understanding of how ICS works. This will help us as, even in our structure fires that we have lots of resources that are coming. We have mutual aid departments coming. Usually law enforcement is there, they're directing traffic. We have EMS, so we do have lots of opportunities to use this. We use it on smaller incidents. Then when we have large complex incidents, it's going to be a lot easier to be able to move into using ICS on those. All right, so I talked about some of these. What are some other examples of planned events where ICS could be used? So I talked about, State Fair. I talked about Indianapolis 500, Bacon Fest. What other examples can you think of around the state or around in our local area where you think ICS could be used for a planned event? Other ideas? Any other events that are big?
County fair.
County fair, right? So ICS could be used at the county fair when you're planning the county fair. Think about all the logistics that are involved in the county fair. There's a lot of animals that are moving in and out, a lot of other people that are moving in and out with all the shows that are going on. So public safety is an issue there, right? Because we got a lot of people coming. Sometimes it's really hot, right? So we need to think about staging EMS and all those things. So it's a good one, county fair. Others?
A lot of university events.
Okay, university events, right? Purdue's just down the road, so basketball games, football games, all the other stuff that they've got going on, use of ICS for those.
We're actually gonna be writing an EAP we're doing a 100-year celebration at camp this year, and they're expecting 1,000 people over the course of Labor Day weekend.
Okay.
And we're gonna be writing an EAP for that, so that
Right. That's
kind
good.
of let local resources know.
Yeah, emergency action plan or IAP. I mean, that's what you use for a planned event. So it talks about what the ICS structure is going to look like, where a resource is coming from, what are staging areas, all the things you need to think about in a planned event. So, using out at Camp Tecumseh is another good example of that. Demi?
How about, they just had one of the sectionals up here at the high school. Did they ever contact anybody and say anything about that?
No, and I was just reading an article about that where there really is a push, and there are lots of examples around the country where school corporations are starting to write an EAP or an IAP for those planned events that they know they're going to have each. Even just, think about if you just do it for your normal football game or your normal basketball game, right? Then you can scale that up when you have something like a sectional.
Well, that was my second question is, are they still doing any action plans or IAPs and incident action plans and stuff like that? Are they still implement those?
You mean the school?
Mm-hmm. Or anybody?
So, yeah, so the incident action plan, and you can get into that more in ICS 300. So what the incident action plan is, there's something called the planning P, and you'll see it when we get into more in depth in ICS. The planning P is used, and it looks like a P. We need a whiteboard up here so that we can draw on it, because you won't be able to see me over there. It's called the planning P. Incident action planning is a process that you use during the operational period, right? So if you are setting up an ICS structure, you have operational periods. Operational periods are usually either 12 hours or 24 hours, though they can vary depending on the incident. So say your operational period is from 0600 to 1800. That's your 12-hour operational period. Your command and general staff, and I'll explain what all that is in a minute, are going to be working through that operational period. And this is an action plan, and the planning P is the way in which you work through that operational period. So the first thing you're doing is you're developing objectives for that operational period, right? The incident commander, working with the command and general staff, are developing objectives. And that's what managing an incident is management by objectives, right? You have to know what your objectives are before you know how you're going to handle the incident. The planning P goes around and talks about different meetings to have during that incident as well, so that you make sure that you're meeting objectives, right? There's a tactical meeting where the operations section is meeting and saying, okay, these are the tactics that we're going to use to meet those objectives during the operational period. The planning section is going to be meeting. Early on, kind of in the stick of the P, that's the initial response phase, right? So that's when things are kind of chaotic. You're trying to get things figured out, trying to figure out, you're doing scene size up, and doing all those sorts of things. But incident action plan is part of that. And the incident action plan is an actual document that gets put together, and it's got all the different ICS forms that you can use. It's got maps. It's got all kinds of things that you use. It's like at Bacon Fest, when we put together an EAP for the Bacon Fest, it's very similar to that. It's got the ICS structure in it. It's got, radio channels, frequencies, contact information, all the things that you need to respond or for a planned event. So the school, I met with the school. I met with the school safety coordinator, which is Mr. Long. And so he has given me a copy of the school's safety plan, and I'm going to go through it, and they're going to start exercising their safety plan, doing some more training around the safety plan. So I think we're headed in a better direction there with stuff at the school. So we had a good meeting. He was very receptive to any and all help and to doing exercises and training. So I think we're headed in a good direction there. Anybody else, any other planned events around that you can think about? So, before we out on, what's that called? Feast of the Hunter's Moon. So they use ICS for that planned event. Tippecanoe County has a mobile command center set up down there, and they use ICS for big things like Feast of the Hunter's Moon. Any other questions or comments, sir? Okay. That's a video. We'll see if
Disaster can strike
Okay.
any time,
This one.
anywhere. It takes many forms: a hurricane, an earthquake, a tornado, a flood, a fire, or a hazardous spill, or an act of terrorism. An incident can build over days or weeks, or hit suddenly, without warning. A poorly managed incident response can undermine our safety and well-being. With so much at stake, we must effectively manage our response efforts. Although most incidents are handled locally, partnerships among local, tribal, state, and federal agencies, as well as non-governmental and private sector organizations, may be required. As partners, we must respond together in a seamless, coordinated fashion. The Incident Command System, or ICS, helps ensure integration of our response efforts. ICS is a standardized, on-scene, all-hazards approach to incident management. ICS allows all responders to adopt an integrated organizational structure that matches the complexities and demands of the incident, while respecting agency and jurisdictional authorities. Although ICS promotes standardization, it is not without needed flexibility. For example, The ICS organizational structure can expand or contract to meet incident needs. In this course, you'll learn ICS principles, and more importantly, you'll learn to interface better with your response partners.
Okay, so a couple of things that they said there is, it can be used at all level of governments, whether it's the local level, state level, the federal level, tribal agencies. So I've been going through something called the National Emergency Management Advanced Academy out in Emmitsburg at the Emergency Management Institute, and it's a 4-week academy. We get together once a quarter. Talk about tribal governments. There are tribes. They're their own independent nations. They have their own emergency management directors, their own police forces. They're like their own entity. So they use this as well. And there's a guy in my class that's from the Seminole tribe. He's their emergency manager, and they're just starting to implement and learn ICS. So it's being used all over the place in all different forms of government. They talked about ICS being flexible and scalable, right? So it's flexible. This is a framework. We need to make sure that we stay as close as we can to the framework, but understand that there are times when the framework may need to be tweaked a little bit. It's scalable, meaning that it can be used for small incidents or large incidents. What I always tell people when I'm teaching ICS classes is, yes, ICS is flexible and scalable, but just don't flex it so much that you break it, right? We want to make sure that we're staying within the methodology, staying within the framework, because if we don't, then it doesn't make sense to use it. Because if we're using different terminology, or we're using different position title names, or we're using a different framework, then we're not using ICS methodology. So yes, it's scalable and flexible, but just make sure we don't flex it so much that we break it. Okay, so NIMS, there's 3 major components to NIMS. We're talking about the National Incident Management System. 3 components to NIMS is resource management, command and coordination, and communications and information. So the component that incident command system is found in is command and coordination. So those are the 3 major components. Incident command system comes from command and coordination. You may see that on the test in the future, so remember that. The ICS is just one part of NIMS. Sometimes people think they're the same thing, like NIMS and ICS is the same thing. It's not. ICS is just one part of the National Incident Management System. So important to keep that in mind. What are some common causes of incident response problems? Don't name people, name problems. What are some common causes of incident response problems? So think about all the incidents that we've responded to, that some of you have responded to over the last several decades. What are some causes of incident response problems?
Too much radio chatter.
Too much radio chatter, so communications, right? It doesn't matter if it's too much radio chatter because people can't get in to talk on the radio. Sometimes in the winter with our 800 megahertz systems, DOT's using the 800 megahertz system, we're using it, law enforcement's using it, and you key up and you get a busy signal, right? So communications systems is one problem. Logistics, like what?
Well, not all the logistics, but communication between each other
Okay.
on the scene.
Yep.
The logistics where you need this and you're not getting it.
Okay.
except for
So
it's like
we call that resource management,
resource
right?
management.
We'll talk about it in a little bit. Resource management too is one of the keys of incident command system, right? Think about responding to incidents. Having the right resources there at the right time is something that we always want to have. And there's a diagram. I don't think it's in ICS 100. I know it is in 300. And they show a diagram of what resource needs look like, right? At the beginning of an incident, you don't have enough resources. You don't have all the resources that you need. Think about just as we're responding to a structure fire. We never have enough water, right? We don't have all the water that we know we're going to need. But so you ask for those resources. Then the curve starts to go up, and then there's a sweet spot where you have the right number of resources, you have the right number of people to meet that incident objective. Then the curve starts going down, and you've got more resources than you need, right? And that's when you should start deactivating resources, because you don't want to have stranded resources. You don't want to have people there or equipment there that doesn't have a job. So, but resource management is a huge part of it. What else? common causes of incident response problems. What are some others? So we talked about communication. We talked about resource management. What's some others?
Jurisdictional.
Okay, right, jurisdictional issues. So it could be from city to city, county to county, state to state. You know, if you think about some of these really big incidents, right, think about a hurricane and all the states, the municipalities and everything that's impacted, figuring out who is responsible for what. So jurisdictional issues. Yep, absolutely. Others, what about training? Can that be an issue in incident response problems? Lack of training, not having the right training, right? Maybe not being trained sufficiently on the equipment that you need to respond to that incident. So that can be a problem. Anything else? Manpower, right. So again, not having enough manpower, right? Or not having the right kind of manpower, or whatever it is. So not having the people you need and the resources you need to be able to handle whatever the incident is. Anything else? So we're not going to do the student activity. We just kind of talked through that. So incident command system has positively impacted incident management. So over time, like I said, incident command system really started in the 70s with FireScope out in California, and then it turned into what it is today in the incident command system. So clarifying chain of command and supervision responsibilities. So who's responsible for what? ICS structure is very clear about who's responsible for what and what that chain of command is, and we'll look at the structure here in a minute. Leveraging interoperable communication systems and plain language to improve communications. So again, like Pat said, you know, making sure that we understand that talking about communication systems, they have to be able to work together, right? So VHF, 800 megahertz, different radios from different places need to be able to talk to each other, but also using plain language. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Think about 10 codes, okay? So think about the 10 codes that you know. We'll talk about those in a minute and what plain language means as opposed to the 10 codes. Orderly, systematic planning process, right? So making sure that we're planning. I talked about management by objectives. So making sure that the incident commander, along with other command and general staff, are putting together objectives, and we're doing management by objectives. Implementing a common, flexible, pre-designed management structure. That's what the ICS structure is. It's a pre-designed, flexible structure that we can use in incident response. And then making sure that we cooperate between disciplines and agencies. So like I said, you'll hear me continue to say, it's not just for private sector, it's for not just for public sector, it's for private sector, non-governmental organizations. When we talk about whole community, it's all those different folks. So again, it's built on best practices. This has been proven over the last 40 years, probably been longer than that now, both in the private sector and the public sector. It helps to ensure safety of responders, community members, and others, because if you're speaking the same language, you're doing management by objectives, you're understanding each other's scope of responsibilities, you know what the command and control structure looks like, it makes responders safer, it makes the community safer. The achievement of incident objectives, you're going to hear me keep stressing that because that's what incident response is management by objectives. A lot of this stuff we do without even knowing that we're doing ICS, right? When we respond to a fire, we know what our objectives are in that fire. We just don't write them out, right? But it's something that we do every time we respond. And then back to what Denny was talking about is resource management. Making sure that we're efficiently using our resources, right? We don't want resources standing around that we don't need, right? But we want to make sure that we have the right number of resources so that we can respond efficiently. All right, let's review what we've learned. What is a basic definition of the incident command system? Should be able to say, you know, it's a structure that's used to respond to incidents or pre-planned events. Is it the same as NIMS? Is ICS and NIMS the same thing? No, ICS is a component of NIMS. Remember, NIMS is the National Incident Management System. What are some situations for which it can be used? We talked about some of those. All right, so that is Unit 1. All right, so effective use of the incident command system is making sure that we use a common organizational structure. As an incident occurs, we need to understand what the different parts of the structure are. It's going to give us another video, hopefully.
As you learned in the previous lesson, ICS is based on proven NIMS management principles, which contribute to the strength and efficiency of the overall system. ICS incorporates a wide range of management features and principles, beginning with the use of common terminology.
Communication is probably one of the most essential elements of ICS. It's important that we know how to communicate.
If the terms that I use mean different things to different people, we're going to have a hard time communicating and doing what needs to be done to accomplish our mission.
ICS emphasizes effective planning, including management by objectives and reliance on an incident action plan.
You have to coordinate on what your end objective is. All up and down the chain, you have to have a common end goal. So you can establish your objectives, you can ensure they're in the incident action plan, and you can ensure that they are in agreement.
ICS employs a modular organizational structure that can be tailored based on the size, complexity, and needs of an incident. Command of this organization is established under a single incident commander or a unified command. The ICS features related to command structure include chain of command and unity of command.
One of the benefits is it gets all the different organizations working under the same framework.
ICS helps ensure full utilization of all incident resources by maintaining a manageable span of control, establishing designated incident facilities and locations, implementing comprehensive resource management practices, defining clear processes for dispatch deployment of resources, and ensuring integrated communications. ICS supports responders and decision makers through effective information and intelligence management.
So common operating picture is a critical thing that the Coast Guard's been working hard on recently for ourselves, because it's something that helps us maintain a better operational picture. And it's more consistent across the board, that everyone up and down the chain of command and across to other agencies understand the same picture.
ICS counts on each of us taking personal accountability for our own actions. And finally, the mobilization process helps ensure that incident objectives can be achieved while responders remain safe.
To have NIMS work effectively, it's got to be top-down support.
The NIMS management characteristics covered in this lesson form the basis for effective, team-based incident response under the Incident Command System, ICS.
All right, so they showed the Coast Guard there. The Coast Guard uses ICS a lot, and they use it really, really well. I've worked with Coast Guard folks in some of the classes that I teach on how to do exercises. So there's a course called the Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Program, or HCEP. It's the program where it talks about how to plan, how to conduct, and how to evaluate exercises. Coast Guard does really good with exercises. They do really well at using the incident command system structure. So that's somebody out there, you know, that is a federal agency that is using ICS, just to show you that it's used across different levels of government. So these are NIMS management characteristics. You don't have to memorize all these words, right? But these are the 14 basic characteristics of management. So common terminology, I talked about that. We're going to talk about it more on the next slide about what that means and some examples. And I think you'll understand when we get there. Modular organization, so they kind of talk about that, right? So we have incident commander, we have the command and general staff, and those things can be moved as you need to move them. So you only activate the parts of ICS that you need to respond to the incident, right? So you don't have to activate the entire structure. One of the basic notions of ICS is the incident commander is the one that's ultimately responsible, right? And the incident commander will then activate those different command and general staff as they're needed for responding to the incident. You don't have to activate all of it. You activate the parts of it that you need. Again, management by objectives, I talked about that. Incident action planning, we talked about what incident action planning is. Manageable span of control just means that you make sure that you have one supervisor that is able to supervise the people that is reporting to them, right? You don't want to have one supervisor that has way too many people that they can't have good accountability of. So that's manageable span of control. And ICS will say that manageable span of control is one supervisor to 5 people reporting to them. Now, that's optimal is 1 to 5. Sometimes in complex incidents and depending on what we're responding to and the people involved, it may be larger than that, because there are in some cases where you can have one supervisor that has 25 people reporting to them. It just depends on what they're doing, what the objectives are, and that sort of thing. But just keep in mind, manageable span of control, optimum is 1 supervisor to 5 people reporting to them. So 1 to 5. That's something you'll see in the test in the future. Incident facilities and locations. So when we say things like an incident command post or a base camp, right, there are descriptions of what those things mean. And that's getting back to common terminology, making sure that we're using the same terms so that, you know, if we respond to something in Mississippi and we say incident command post, we're all talking about the same thing. Comprehensive resource management. So again, making sure that we're tracking resources, we're ordering resources in the right way, and we know who's responsible for doing all those things. Integrated communication so that we can all talk to each other. Establishment and transfer of command. So that's what I talked about in the beginning. That first person that is on scene from the fire department, police department, emergency management, EMS, they're the incident commander until there's a transfer of command that happens, right? So they can remain incident commander. They don't have to transfer command, right? If they're qualified to serve in that role of incident commander, then they may continue to be the incident commander. If they're not, then there's transfer of command that happens to that initial incident commander to somebody that's more qualified, okay? And that's a transfer of command. Unified command. So unified command, we'll talk about this more, is so if you have an incident and there's, say we have an incident here in Delphi, and we'll say it's a vehicle crash, okay? So who typically responds to a vehicle crash besides us?
Law enforcement.
Law enforcement, EMS, right? Sometimes EMA if we've got a spill or something. So if you have fire department, you have law enforcement, you have EMS, and you have EMA. What unified command looks like is you don't have one singular incident commander. Unified command would be the incident commander from the fire department, incident commander from law enforcement, incident commander from EMS, and incident commander for EMA. They're working together in a unified command as incident commanders in a unified command. They're developing objectives together for that incident response. The rest of the structure looks like it normally would. It's just that instead of one singular incident commander, you have multiple incident commanders and a unified command that are building those objectives together. Don't get that confused with unity of command. Okay, so unified command is when you have multiple incident commanders developing objectives together. Unity of command is that you only report to one person in that ICS structure, right? So if you're in the operations section and you're a branch director, you're only reporting to the operations section chief. You're not also reporting to the planning section chief. So that's what unity of command is. You're only reporting to one person in that chain of command, right? Chain of command is just a hierarchy. I think everybody probably knows what chain of command is. Accountability, so it's making sure that we know who is on the incident scene, what they're doing, right? That's kind of the two parts to accountability. Who's here and what is their assignment and where are they at, right? 3 things. Who's here, what are they doing, and where are they at? Making sure we have accountability. Dispatch and deployment. One thing we don't want to do is self-dispatch, right? You do not want to self-dispatch yourself. So, you know, you hear that Camden has a structure fire, but Delphi hasn't been toned yet. You should not dispatch yourself to that fire, right? You shouldn't show up to that fire until they tone Delphi to respond to that fire, right? This was a big problem. This can be a big problem on these big complex incidents. Happens with hurricanes, right? People throw their gear in their car and say, hey, I'm going to go down to Katrina and I'm going to help with the hurricane. Well, there's lots of problems with that, right? Probably didn't think about you're going to have to feed yourself and have water for yourself for a long period of time. You may not have all the training that you need to be able to respond to a hurricane. Who's going to be responsible for you while you're there? You're at an extra burden for people that they may not need your help. So that's why we need to make sure that we don't self-dispatch or self-deploy. And then information and intelligence management. So this is just all the stuff that comes in during an incident. All the information that you're getting, all the intelligence that you're getting. Don't think just about like law enforcement type intelligence. Intelligence is just things that are going on in the community that might impact your incident. Okay, we'll talk about common terminology and then we'll take a break. So common terminology, this allows diverse agencies, whether it's public, private, non-governmental organizations, religious organizations, what it is, to make sure that we can work together in different scenarios and make sure we're talking about the same thing, right? So organizational functions, we need to make sure that we're using the proper names and defining them in a standard and consistent way, right? We don't want to be confused when we're responding about what things mean. Resource description, so this is the big one, and I'll give you an example here in a minute. Major resources, including personnel, equipment, teams, and facilities, are given common names and typed with respect to their capabilities. We'll talk about typing later, but just as for an instance. So if we're on a fire and we want a truck with a lot of water on it, what do we call that? Okay. If you go to California and you're fighting a wildfire and you ask for a tanker, what are you going to get? You're going to get an airplane that's full of water, okay? So that's why we need to make sure that we use common terminology and understand what's what. What do they call, what we call tankers here, what do they call them out there?
Water tenders.
Water tenders, right? So you just need to know that. So if you're responding to a fire in California and you want a truck with water on it, you want to call for a water tender, not a tanker. So that's just common terminology. Same thing goes to 10 signals, right? So what's a 1051? Ricker. Right, so you just about did what I'm getting ready to point out. What were you going to say?
Ambulance.
Right, so that's why when you need something, say what you need. Don't use 10 signals, okay? Don't use them. There's no reason to use 10 signals anymore. They served a purpose. Denny, do you remember what the purpose of 10 signals originally was? Why we started using 10 signals?
Too many people out there scanners, phone scanners.
Well, even before that, there's a reason why we used 10 signals.
No, I can't remember.
So it used to be, think about the old radios, right? I'm talking
Yeah.
about analog radios.
Animals, yeah.
Okay, so when you keyed up, you wanted to make sure you held that key down
For at least
while
3
you
seconds.
talked, at least 3 seconds. And that's why we started using 10 signals, right? So that, to make sure that you hold that key down. Another reason is so that people, law enforcement use it because they didn't want people in scanner land to know what they're talking about. It didn't take long to figure out what 10 signals are. So make sure you're using plain language, because just like Pat just about did, and every one of us in here has probably done it. 1051 in Indiana, 10 signals, well, and that can even vary by county, right? So even 10 signals in Indiana can vary. But in Carroll County, Indiana, a 1051 is a wrecker, a 1052 is an ambulance. So those are pretty close together. You don't want to be confused whether you're asking for a wrecker or an ambulance. So make sure that you use plain language. Just tell dispatch what you need. Don't worry about using 10 signals. Don't worry about using codes. Codes are another thing, right? So just use that common terminology. Incident facilities, right? So if we talk about an incident command post, we need to know what that means. If we talk about a base camp or we talk about a staging area, we need to know what that means. So again, make sure communications use common terms. Avoid using radio codes, agency-specific codes, all that kind of stuff. Because if we're on a large incident, even if it's somebody from another county, the codes that we use in Carroll County for radio codes may not mean the same thing as they do in Boone County. So just use plain language. The goal is to make sure that everybody understands what you're saying and what you're asking for. So that's common terminology. Let's take 5 minutes.
Yeah, Grandpa, I was still recording, but you know how I did it? I pointed it down to where it won't face the screen.
Well, you can actually set it up right where you can get Justin talking.
I don't want to get in trouble with it though.
No, you won't get it. He was joking with you.
Why the? Oh my god! Dang it! Not wrong.
Did you get in contact with man? Any kind of follow up?
Doug was out there, and he got the information for this meeting. And everything else from him.
Just didn't want man to take a little bit of anything.
I was gonna do a report tonight, but I called this dispatch to send me the CAD and so now it goes. So I figured the insurance companies would be calling up this week. So.
Well, you know. Who's the insurance company? Man's.
Yeah, because they're gonna, I mean, I would think their liability insurance would have to cover it.
You know who the service truck that was, but started the whole thing, right? I eventually told him to get clear of it because we didn't need to cloud the issues anymore.
Yeah, I think it will be manual insurance.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if Ashley's car was just parked there, or if he was having it worked on, or what.
Who?
Actually,
That was Ashley Tyner's, the other car was Ashley Tyner's.
Yeah, it was his wife's car.
Yeah.
Nursing, the nurses on it.
The other, the Suburban, Mike Rush's
Yeah.
wife's, whatever she is.
I'll be back. I'll be back.
Did you check, I sent you, did you check?
So, shout out to Maddie Moore. I kind of had to restart there for a little bit. So, what my battery was? 59. So this should last for what's left. It is approximately. It's only 7:9. It's only 19:19 really. But I'm not gonna stop. I'm not gonna let Justin fool me. But so what he was talking about, it will actually be kind of useful. I'd already figured what it's called, but like, so I'll give a demonstration right here and I'll head back in. So say I'll run it real quick. So say Delphi gets run. Attention Delphi Fire, request to route 444 north, 750 west for reported structure fire. So 444 north, 750 west. It's not a real address, so don't actually quote me on that, but we'll hop up in here. Don't ask why I got a pencil. And then we'll start the truck. Maybe I should have done this from the officer side of things, but fuck it. We'll just use the code 3 radio. So I'll be like, come on. Oh, I gotta flip it around if I want to show it. So I'll be like, Carroll County 505 en route with how many men we got on board. Put that back. Respond with 505. And then we'll be like, Carroll County 505's 1023. So 505's 1023 the area. And we'll force say they responding with the ladder as well. So So we're on scene. And then so we'll like roll it like stuff. So we'll say that 505 and 542 just showed up. And then they get going, and then the incident commander has to buckle that up, so back in and then get going. I'll wait till Dan gets out of the way. So. Alright, so I'll head back in and get going. So, yep.
Didn't really blanket it, just, overpressurized.
Yeah.
Didn't know if it's pouring.
Burnt down too.
Overhead. Yep. Okay, let's go ahead and get going again. We'll go to about 8 o'clock for this tonight. We probably won't get through all of it. We'll do some more of this at another training sometime. So we talked about that already. Okay, so modular organization. This is where we kind of get into how things are organized. So, again, like I said, ICS expands and contracts based on the size and the complexity of the incident. So use the parts that you need. You don't have to activate all of it. You only activate what you need. Responsibility for establishment and depending on an expansion of ICS is rests with incident command. So ultimate authority for the incident response rests with that incident commander. As the incident grows more complex, then you need to add more parts of the organization to it. Okay, management by objectives. So I say this probably 10,000 times when I'm teaching ICS classes. You got to make sure that you're doing management by objective. Right? It's good to have written objectives so that you know what the objectives are for the operational period, so that you can mark those off. You know, as you meet the objectives, you mark the objectives off. If you need to change your objectives because something about the incident changes, then you change your objectives, right? It's flexible in that way. We use SMART objectives, so specific, measurable. There's a response to it. There's a time frame that goes along with it. There's an acronym called SMART. Some of you have probably seen that before. We're developing objectives. You need to make sure that they're SMART, that they're specific, that they're measurable, that they're realistic, that there's a time frame that goes with it. Identify strategies, tactics, and objectives. So strategies are kind of the high level. You know, how are we going to do this? That's strategies. Tactics are the things that you do to meet the objectives. Okay, so an example of an objective is we're going to put out the fire by 10 o'clock p.m. Okay, what's a tactic?
How about his fire?
Car fire.
Time will we get
How do you fight the fire?
Well, tactic is just what you're going to do. You're going to drag the hose up there. You're going to open the nozzle. You're going to put the water on the car to put the fire out. That's a tactic. Okay, so it's the boots on the ground stuff that you do to meet the objective. Developing and issuing assignments, plans, procedures, and protocols to meet those tasks, and then documenting the results. So again, when I talk about ICS, we do most of this stuff when we're responding to incidents. We just don't do it in a formal way, with a formal structure. And some of the things that we've got to start doing is being more formal about the way that we do things, okay? Especially in larger, more complex incidents, all right? If we talk about it and we do some of these things on smaller incidents, it's gonna be easier to do if we have larger incidents, right? It can be simple things like just saying, you know, whoever has incident command, right? And then if you transfer to somebody else, say transferring command to whoever, it's setting up staging areas. One of the things that I would like to see us do as a county is, instead of, if we have a house fire out on a county road, we shouldn't have 52 tankers lined up on that county road. We should have them in a staging area someplace that's not on the county road that the fire's on, right? And have somebody there that is the water officer that's calling in a tanker as it's needed, instead of having 52 tankers lined up on the county road clogging stuff up. But that's just one example. That's resource management, right? That's doing staging, and you have to have enough people to do that too, and I understand that. But if we just think about doing some of these things in a more formal way, then when we have a large incident, and we will, it'll be a lot easier to do. Incident action planning, so that's kind of what you're talking about, Denny, and I explained that a little bit, right? So incident action plan tells us what we need to do. It covers a specific time frame, so that's the operational period. Remember I said operational periods are typically 12 hours or 24 hours. You change over your incident command system structure at the end of operational period. They specify the incident objectives, so it talks about what are the objectives we're going to meet during this operational period. Tells you what activities need to be completed, so that's the tactics, right? The tactics are the things that you're going to do to meet the objectives. Assigns responsibilities, who's responsible for what? That's in the incident action plan as well. Identify needed resources, so in the incident action plan, there's an ICS form that shows what resources you have on scene right now, what resources are you going to need in the next operational period, and that will show you what resources you need to order, right? Depending on what objectives you have for the operational period. Specify communications protocols. So there's another ICS form that has places to fill in, you know, who's assigned to what radio channel or frequency, what is cell phone contact information for different people, what is their position and titles. So that's what incident action plan is. So incident action plan can be written and informal, it can be informal. And again, we do a lot of these things really informally. The only time that you must have an incident action plan is on a hazardous materials incident. And there are standards out there, not just standards, there are regulations out there that say if it's a hazardous materials incident, you must have a written incident action plan. So just keep that in mind. You'll see that on the test sometime. Hazardous materials incident, you must have a written incident action. I'm not going to do this. So I talked about manageable span of control. If you see something in bold, then that's something you'll see on the test in the future. Span of control is the number of individuals or resources that one supervisor can manage effectively in an incident. So again, optimal span of controls, one supervisor to 5 people reporting to them. That's optimal, but sometimes that ratio may be higher, right, for lots of different reasons. Though, is just to make sure that that supervisor can manage those resources, right? You don't want a supervisor that's overwhelmed, they can't manage the resources. If that's the case, then you either need to lower the number of resources and personnel, or you need to add another supervisor to be able to do that. What are some examples of when span of control is most critical? So what are some examples of when it's important to make sure that we have, you know, try to get that optimal span of control, one supervisor to 5 people reporting to them? For some examples.
Or if your incident grows.
Right, as your incident grows. As the incident gets more complex and you've got more resources that are responding, then you want to make sure that you have that good span of control so that supervisors are able to make sure that they have accountability for the resources. What else? Depending on the hazard of the incident, right? If it's, you know, think about something really hazardous responses, flooding response, you know, that's something that we do that's typically pretty hazardous. Structure fires, we want to make sure that we have a good span of control for those. Hazardous materials incidents.
Train wreck,
Train wreck, yep.
each car is different.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So span of control is important in all of those. Okay, incident facilities and location, again, we just need to make sure that we have an understanding of what these different things mean. Designated facilities can be something like an incident command post. So an incident command post is a fixed facility, usually where, well, that'd be a fixed facility, I take that back. Incident command post is a location where generally the people in incident command structure are going to be, and where the incident response is ran from. So incident command post could be this room, right, during Bacon Fest. This room is the incident command post for Bacon Fest, right? It's where command and general staff operate out of. It could be a mobile command center, right? So mobile command center could be your incident command post. Tippecanoe County has a mobile command center, right? The big blue mobile command center. My company has 3 mobile command centers in different states. We use those to respond to incidents, and there are incident command posts. Incident base, staging area, and camps. So an incident camp is where you would go for a rest period. So if you're there and it's going to be a several day response, the camp is where you're going to go back to take your rest period. Okay, so you've been on your operational period, maybe it's a 12-hour operational period, you've worked 6A to 6P, you're going to go back to your camp from 6P to 6A, right? Staging area is where resources are put that are planned to be used during the operational period. And the thing to remember about staging areas, things in staging areas should only be things that are in service, okay? So you shouldn't have a piece of apparatus in a staging area that's out of service, right? So if you have a fire truck that isn't running, it shouldn't be in a staging area, because the staging area is only for resources that are in service, that are planned to be used during the operational period. Same thing for people, right? If you've got somebody in the staging area and, you know, they have traveled for 10 hours through the night to get there, and you know that they're not going to be able to be worth much for the next 12-hour operational period, they shouldn't be in staging area, because they're really not ready to respond for that operation. Mass casualty triage areas. So triage is where we, you know, figure out what people's medical needs are and classify them accordingly. So mass triage area, mass casualty triage area is going to be that area where people are taken to and they're classified accordingly as they need to be for triage. Point of distribution. So points of distribution are used, well, COVID is a prime example of that, right? Points of distribution where people went to get their vaccination. So just different things. These are incident facilities and locations. Be familiar with them. So again, we talked about resource management. Denny talked about it. Resource management is really crucial. Again, in that initial response phase, we don't have enough resources. You know, that's usually the case. That's almost always the case for us, right? We respond to a structure fire. We get there, we roll with one engine. That's not generally not all we need for a structure fire. Comprehensive resource management is about knowing how we're going to identify what we need, right? That's done through the objectives, strategies, and tactics. And then ordering and acquiring those resources, mobilizing those resources, tracking and reporting those resources, and then demobilizing resources. And we do this every time that we respond to something, right? We know what resources we need. So if we have a 1050 PI with entrapment on the heartland, what resources do we generally need? EMS.
Law enforcement, us.
Law enforcement, us. Okay, what specific resources do we need from the fire department?
Extrication tools,
Okay,
manpower.
right? So we've identified our requirements. How do we order and acquire resources for that 1050 PI with entrapment on the heartland? How do we do that?
Communication from the dispatch center.
Right, we call dispatch and say, hey, we need Camden to respond, right? And we tell them what we need. That's ordering and acquiring resources. Right? I'm just trying to demonstrate we do this stuff, right? We just don't call it this. Mobilize. We get toned out, we get in the truck, and we get them, right? We call and order those resources, which is mutual aid, and they're doing the same thing. They're mobilizing. How do we track and report?
Call your on scene.
Call your on scene. Tell them who's on scene. And this is something we're going to do better about, right? Is accountability. So we've got the accountability tags. We don't have a policy in place yet, but we're going to about how we use them. We've used them a few different ways in the past, so we still need to decide how we're going to use those now that we have them. So we still need to put policy together. So that's tracking and reporting, and then demobilizing. How do we demobilize? From the 1050 PI.
Clean it up.
Clean it up, and we demobilize, we leave. right? And then, so it talks about expendable and non-expendable. So in that process of demobilizing, let's say it was a structure fire, we're gonna go fill our tankers up with water, make sure that the truck has water on it. That's part of the recovery and demobilization process, and then reimburse. So if there's mutual aid departments there and we've broken some of their stuff or something like that, we're gonna reimburse them for that. So we use this resource management cycle every time we respond to something. We just don't think about it in this formal way, but we're doing this all the time. So again, we do this stuff, it's just thinking about it in a more formal way. That's all I see this as. Anybody have any questions or comments on that? So you're doing this and you don't even know. Okay. Integrate communications again, so that's just making sure that we are able to talk to each other, that we can maintain connectivity, so that we have good situational awareness. You hear me talking about situational awareness all the time. Situational awareness is making sure that we know what's going on around us, right? Identifying things that are out of place, and keeping that situational awareness, not getting television, having a good idea of everything that's going on. Facilitate information sharing. We can only do that if we can talk to each other, right? That's why it's important to make sure that, you know, if we go to a fire and we say we're going to go to fire ground 1, make sure everybody understands that we're going to fire ground 1, so that we can have the integrated communications. This used to be a much bigger problem than it is for us now, right? With the 800 megahertz system. Not that it always works, right? But it's easier for everybody to talk to each other. Because think about in the olden days, it was a lot harder. People were operating on different channels, different frequencies, you know. If you had mutual aid departments coming from White County or Tippecanoe County, it was a lot harder for us to communicate with each other. It was a lot harder for us to communicate to law enforcement or EMS or whatever. Now with the 800 megahertz system, it's easier. Not that it's perfect, because it's not, but it's a lot easier. All right, establishment and transfer of command. So, talked about this already. The command function should be established at the beginning of an incident, right? Like I said, the first person on the scene from the fire department is the de facto incident commander. So again, keep that in mind when you're responding to the scene of something. You are that initial incident commander until there is a transfer of command. So you have all the responsibilities of that incident commander when you respond to that incident. So just think about that next time you want to respond to the scene instead of come to the station. The jurisdiction or organization with the primary responsibility for the incident designates the incident commander in the process for transferring command. So that kind of goes back to what Michael talked about. It's recognizing who is that jurisdiction that has the primary responsibility. Transfer of command may occur during the course of an incident. When that command is transferred, the process should include a briefing. So whenever a transfer of command happens, that should happen face to face, right? If one incident commander is transferring command to another incident commander, they should do that face to face. Not call them on the telephone and say, hey man, you're it, I'm out, right? They need to give them the scene size up. They need to tell them what kind of resources are there and available, what kind of resources might be needed. They need to talk to them about accountability, who's what, who's doing what. That's what transfer of command is. So what are some reasons why we might do a transfer of command?
If I show up first.
What?
If I show up first.
Doesn't have to be.
Well, I mean, I'm the least experienced guy here, so.
Okay, that's one reason. You might, if there's a more experienced person, right, that comes up along, then you might transfer command. So that's one area. Some other reasons you might transfer command.
Incoming officer has more experience.
Okay, yep, somebody might have more experience, even in that particular thing, right? So say it's a hazmat situation, and you know anything about hazmat, you might transfer command. You don't have to necessarily, but you can. What else? Or some other reasons? Change in operational period, right? So you're going to do a 12-hour operational period, 6A to 6P, and it's time for you to to transfer out of that operational period. There's gonna be a transfer of command from that outgoing incident commander to that incoming incident commander. So, more experienced persons on scene, you might transfer command. It's the end of your operational period, might be a transfer of command. Incident commander might get sick, right? Halfway through the operational period, there might be a transfer of command. Maybe the incident changes. Maybe it started out as a fire incident, and the fire chief is the incident commander. Maybe it suddenly turns into more of a law enforcement incident. You might transfer command to law enforcement officer. You don't have to, and that might not be the case all the time, but you might do that. Jurisdictional things, right? So it may start out as one thing, and you think it's one thing, and maybe local police are the incident commander, and suddenly it becomes a domestic terrorist incident like the courthouse bombing in Tippecanoe County, and then the FBI, the ATF, and all the other alphabet agencies show up, and there's a transfer of command, right? Because now it's become a potential domestic terrorist incident. So lots of reasons why you might transfer command. All right, unified command. I talked about this. This kind of shows you what that looks like. So in unified command, there's no single incident commander. There's several incident commanders that work together to develop those objectives. Unified command is typically established when no single jurisdiction, agency, or organization has the authority for all the resources, right? Just like I talked about. It can happen on small incidents, large incidents. This is what a typical basic ICS structure looks like. So unified command, or the single incident commander at the top. This is called the general staff. So the operations section, the planning section, the logistics section, finance and admin section chief are the general staff, and the command staff is your public information officer, your safety officer, and liaison officer. Each one of those positions has specific roles and responsibilities that are assigned to them in the incident command system structure. So just know this is what the basic ICS structure looks like. And again, incident commander is the one that has ultimate authority for all incident response. And this, we'll go into more detail on each one of those positions. I don't think we get to that. We probably won't get to that tonight, but this is what the basic structure is. Okay, again, we talked about chain of command. I think probably everybody in here understands what chain of command means. It's an orderly line that talks about how authority flows, right? It's allows the incident commander to direct and control the actions of everybody that's subordinate to him in an incident, and avoids confusion, making sure that orders flow from supervisors. And again, you only report to one supervisor, right? That's unity of command, making sure that each person only reports to one supervisor. This is a problem that we have in our company because people have their daytime jobs, right? And they report to somebody during the daytime, but when they're activated into ICS structure, they're reporting to somebody in that ICS structure and not to their daytime supervisor, or the daytime supervisor still wants to tell them to do stuff, but they're reporting to this person in the ICS structure, and they're not supposed to be doing the stuff that their daytime supervisor wants them to do. That can happen with us too. If you're part of an incident management team or an IMAT or something like that, you don't report to your normal day-to-day supervisor. You report to whoever your supervisor is in that ICS structure. So chain of command is just that hierarchy, making sure that the orders flow from supervisors. Unity of command I just talked about, making sure that you report to only one incident command system supervisor, and you receive only work assignments from your ICS supervisor. So again, if you're operations branch director, you should only take your work assignments from the operations section chief. You're not taking your work assignments from the logistics section chief. You're taking your work assignments from the operations section chief. So when you're assigned to an incident, you no longer report to your day-to-day supervisor, and you only take assignments from your ICS supervisor. That's unity of command. Okay, accountability. Making sure that we know where resources are, we know what people are, we know what their assignment is. Several principles: check in, check out. Making sure that people check in so we know when they got there, they're given assignment, and before they demobilize, making sure that we check out so we have good accountability for both people and other resources. Incident action planning, we talked about what that incident action plan is, right? That's how we build objectives. It's all those different things that go into the meetings, Their resources, all ICS forms, that's instant action planning, unity of command, each individual assigned to only one supervisor, personal responsibility. ICS relies on each individual taking personal accountability for his or her own actions. Right? This doesn't work if we don't take our own personal responsibility. Right? We need to make sure that we're taking personal responsibility for our own safety, making sure we're taking personal responsibility to ensure that we are doing our roles and responsibilities. Right? We're doing what our ICS supervisor has given us to do. Span of control. Again, what's optimal span of control?
1 to 5.
1 to 5 is optimal span of control. Resource tracking, so those people are responsible for resource tracking need to make sure that they're doing that. They're tracking the resources that they're responsible for so that we have good accountability. Accountability for tracking resources starts the minute that resource is requested. And there's specific people in the ICS structure that track it at different times. Planning section tracks resources at a particular time. Logistics section tracks at a particular time. Operations section track resources at a particular time. So just know that there are different people that are responsible for tracking those resources. Again, the resources not requested should refrain from self-dispatching to avoid overburdening the incident command. Again, this happens on large incidents. This happened on 9/11, you know. Thousands of firefighters across the country threw their turnout gear in the back of the pickup truck and headed to New York City. And we all know why that happened. We want to help, right? We wouldn't be doing this if we didn't want to help people, if we didn't want to help the community. But it became overburdening to the incident commanders because now we got thousands of firefighters showing up. We don't know where they're from. We don't know what their qualifications are. We got to feed these guys. We got to find some place for these people to eat. I didn't ask for them. I don't have assignments for them, but here they are. Same thing happened in Hurricane Katrina. Right, Denny? Mm-hmm. People were self-dispatching, showing up when they weren't even asked for. There are processes in place for those things to happen, right? EMAC is one of those things. That's how we wound up sending law enforcement officers to Hurricane Katrina. It was through EMAC. So just know, don't self-dispatch yourself. Even happens to us, right? People just show up, even if we haven't asked for them. Sometimes that's okay, because we're glad to see the help. Sometimes it's not okay, because I didn't ask for you to be here, and now I've got to have accountability for you. So don't self-dispatch. Again, it doesn't just happen in public sector, it happens in the private sector. If we have some kind of large incident that happens at my company in Indiana, people from Ohio start deciding they need to send people without being asked. So now you have gas servicemen show up from Ohio, and they've got nothing to do. So it doesn't just happen for us. Don't do that. Talked about that. Again, information and intelligence gathering. Don't think just law enforcement, because it's not just that. They say this here, but they've changed the definition of what intelligence is. It can be threat-related information, but think about threat broadly. Just don't think about bad guys, right? It can be any kind of risk or whatever. It may be knowing that there's a particular hazardous materials in a building down the block when we've got a fire in another block. So incident management, we have to gather, analyze, share information, right? And we do this all the time. We do that through communication. When we're getting on the radio and we're giving a scene size up, we're sharing information. We're doing information sharing, right? When we're telling somebody, hey, I'm stopping northbound traffic, we're communicating and we're doing information sharing. So just think about it in that way. All right, so here's kind of a summary, and we'll probably stop there. Unit 2. Again, we talked about all these different things. These are those 14 principles, NIMS principles I talked about early on. Common terminology, manageable span of control. Again, incident management is management by objectives. Unified command, don't confuse unified command and unity of command. So those are all the things we've talked about. And that's the first 2 units of ICS 100. So again, if you want to go online to the FEMA website, ICS 100, 200, and 700 are on there. If you want to do independent study, you can do those. You can take the test. We'll be doing some more of this because, again, like I said, we need to start doing this a little more formally, not just us, but county-wide. You know, I hope that we can start doing some of these things so that when we do have a complex, big incident, and we will, that we are implementing some of these things, so. Dan?
So just, real quick, I apologize, I missed the first unit. Some of this stuff, as you sit here, if you don't have any experience in like larger scale operations, or maybe you're brand new altogether in incident management, so you would take and read these slides and listen to what Justin has to say and think, man, I don't know how this is applicable, like, we don't have World Trade Center. Is this something that we would use? And if so, how often? So the fact of the matter is, and I'm sure you probably said it, we should be using this every time we go out of station, to some degree, right? We might not need to have the financial section come in and, you know, but I bet that was a concern when the Andersons was on fire for day 13, you know, how was everybody gonna pay these people? Staging, you have 57 water tankers and tenders and.
I said
helicopters.
52, but 57.
You know,
And we went through the whole week up, nobody getting hurt.
Right, so like, where are they? Where are they gonna get water from? Does the city have enough water supply, you know, stuff like that. So, those things happen in Delphi. And even in our townships outside of Delphi, more rural areas. So, just a couple quick things to relate it to some of the things that we do here. Resource tracking. You know, you would think Hurricane Katrina, obviously, we have teams coming from Indiana going to Mississippi. The governor's office got assigned something, everybody's tracking how much it's gonna cost. In the federal government, vehicles worth this much, mileage is worth this much. They have to pay us our salary, our overtime, and our fringe, so like the insurance, you know, stuff, the benefits that you get, they have to pay all that. So that's something that happens in a large scale incident. Is that something that we would do in Delphi for a house fire? So, yep, it is actually. That's how we bill. When we bill insurances. So if you have a house fire, resource tracking is, we send 4 apparatus. It's $250 per truck to show up at the scene. And it's $125 an hour in addition to that for every truck that's at the scene that I could bill the person. Alright, so some fire departments just send the bill out and be like, hey, that's how much you owe, give us our money. I feel like if we take 2 tankers and we didn't actually use them, like I deduct some of that, you know what I mean? Because again, it's a resource that we had available but we didn't use, I just feel it's not fair. So we do resource tracking, that's how we fund about $8,000 to $10,000 of spending money in our budget every year is resource tracking just for fire calls. But then also, resource tracking is somewhat smaller than that in the sense that you don't have to be out very long when someone says, hey, someone find me a thermal imaging camera, right? We've all done that. Or give me a thermal imaging camera. And when we were out at the house fire just on Crestwood last month, the person who handed me a thermal imaging camera, it was Camden's, right? Someone inside had Delphi's. So all that stuff is resource tracking because it costs $3,000 or more, $5,000 for a thermal imaging camera. I want to make sure that it's coming back. Who has it? Who had it last? Why does it no longer work? You know, stuff like that. So we need to incorporate that stuff into a lot of things. The unity of command thing is one of the most important things I think, as it relates especially to freelancing. I don't know if you use that word.
Go ahead.
So freelancing, you know, you get there and just find something that you think is fun and start working on it, you know. But unity of command, you know, I might be the fire chief and the incident commander at that scene. But when you get there, you're assigned to RIT, and probably somebody's in charge of RIT. So even as the fire chief or the incident commander, I shouldn't be able to, I can't walk up to you as a RIT team member, sitting at the door waiting for an emergency and say, hey, Ben, can you go grab me a ladder? Then you say no, unless you talk to the guy in charge of RIT. You know, like, this is my job. Even though I might have more rank, or I might be the incident commander, like, you have your job, and you report to that boss in charge of RIT. And I can't overrule him and say, I'm reassigned to you, unless I have someone else to put in that spot. So that's really applicable to what we do. It also relates to the check in, check out. And this happens on a lot of our fires, not just with Delphi people, but like you said, we have people come and help us all the time. We've had people that show up on scene in their POV, get out, do 1 or 2 tasks, be done with it, and leave with no check-in or check-out. And that unity of command and having somebody that you check into that knows where you're at, that accountability. There's been several times where we've had fires and someone has come up and said, hey, have you seen so-and-so? How do you know so-and-so was here? Yeah, he was inside pulling ceiling. Okay, where is he now? I don't know, that's why I'm asking, we can't find him. Well, we can't find him because he left. He didn't tell anybody he was there. He didn't tell anybody he was leaving. The last thing we know is he was in there doing something. So it causes some stress, especially from the command stuff, kind of stuff. So that's why I think it's not just hurricanes, not just tornadoes or like mass destruction. You use this stuff all the time in the different sections, logistics, staging. I want you guys to drive around town and think about staging when you're just driving to go to the restaurant. Pass by a parking lot and think, man, hey, if any building within 5 blocks of here was on fire, I could put a lot of fire trucks and ambulances in that parking lot. Something you think about as you're driving by, so you don't have to wonder when the crap hits the fan, where am I gonna put the fire truck? So you could think of staging, you could think of logistics, equipment. Where do you get a back truck if there's a trench collapse? Right?
Here's your bag.
What's that?
Here's your bag.
Okay. So, those kind of resources that you might not use every day. If there's a hazmat, who do we call? Monticello? Depending on where you're at, Monticello? Lafayette. District 4, like the team up, has a big response.
Franklin's got one.
There's a airplane crash at the airport. Purdue.
Yeah.
Only crash truck around. Except for Grissom, Purdue's much closer. What else would you use Purdue's crash truck?
Fuel tankers.
Fuel tankers, like sodium metals or some, like stuff that you just can't use water for. And they have 1,000 pounds of dry chemical on the truck that shoots out of the fire. You know what I mean? So learn what the resources they have in the area are. Because when it comes to logistics, it's really hard to come up with that stuff in the heat of the moment. So stuff's very important. And as we start incorporating it a little more and more into our scenes, I think it'll become easier for everybody. Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody, thanks for coming, have a good night. See you next time.
What? Oh. Alright, so this will be the end of training here. Well, more or less of a classroom class for DFD. Like I said, shout out to Maddie Moore. I love you, so. Nah. And yeah, you guys are looking at your boy here, who's going to be a new Delphi Tri-Township Volunteer Fire Department cadet here pretty soon. I'm going to end the video off over here next to 526, our new rig. So there, yeah, so we're gonna end it here. All right, guys, this will be it. Peace. And also like, subscribe, comment.